Some stories touch, and others transform. This is not just a tale of romance, it's a journey into a connection so intense. It stirs what's been hidden, forgotten, almost asleep. It all begins with one unforgettable look, eyes that don't just see, but reach deep, waking something raw and aching to be felt again. A pull so powerful, it feels less like choice and more like destiny unfolding. And then comes the night that refuses to stay just a night, breath against breath, skin against skin, kisses slow and deep enough to feel like forever stitched into every moment. Yet what truly changes everything is what lasts long after the warmth that stays, the heartbeat that remembers, the love that lingers even when the fire quiets. Welcome to a place where every story isn't just told, it is lived deep inside your soul. It was never meant to turn into anything. That's what made every breath feel dangerous, every glance feel stolen. There was a line that should never have been crossed, and yet all it took was one moment, a quiet room, a heartbeat that wasn't steady anymore, eyes that looked too long, and something buried deep inside began to unravel. It wasn't sudden or loud, it was slow, a pulse that grew stronger each time his presence came closer. It started in small ways, a tingle at the base of the spine, a warmth that should have cooled itself, but only burned hotter with every effort to resist. One passing touch lingered longer than it should have, leaving heat on the skin that refused to fade. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Distance became impossible. Every attempt to stay composed turned into a trembling failure. There was no logic strong enough to calm the storm that had begun to build between two people who knew the cost of surrender and yet wanted it anyway. The more it was fought, the stronger it grew. Everything whispered that it couldn't happen, that it shouldn't, but desire swelled until it drowned out every warning. Words became risky. Conversations carried too much breath, too much loaded silence. Each time closeness was avoided, the craving doubled, and each time space slipped away again, there was that rush, that helpless, uncontrollable need that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. One night became the breaking point. The world around fell silent, leaving only two hearts pounding. Fingers brushed, then trembled, hesitant until hesitation broke entirely. Lips met softly at first, almost frightened, but quickly melted into hunger. Every ounce of restraint shattered under the truth of how long this longing had been building. Hands roamed with a kind of desperation that made it impossible to slow down. Soft gasps mixed with frantic breathing. The kiss deepened with an urgency that spoke of years of unmet desire. Neither of them wanted to pretend anymore or hold anything back. There was nothing gentle about the way their bodies pulled toward each other. It was raw, overwhelming, scorching. Skin flushed as if every nerve had waited for this spark to ignite. Clothes were pushed aside carelessly, as though fabric itself was an insult to the connection growing hotter between them. The moment bodies touched fully, every buried need surged to the surface. A moan escaped before it could be muffled. Fingers gripped tight. Lips trailed along shoulders, throats, collarbones, desperate to taste every inch. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about the surrender that came when control was finally abandoned. He whispered things against the skin, things never dared to be said in daylight. Each word slid deeper than touch itself, leaving a burn that no water could cool. Sharp hunger softened into a worshipful tenderness. His hands moved gently now, almost reverently, creating long, slow strokes that made heat rise again even stronger. The body arched into every movement, a silent plea for more. Soft whimpers filled the space where words couldn't survive. The fire between them grew so intense it became hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Every thrust, every cry, every shaky breath felt like opening something that would never close again. Weak attempts at staying quiet were lost entirely to the sounds of passion echoing off the walls. It was wild, messy, beautiful. When pleasure finally tore through, It wasn't a single wave, but a storm, a shaking surrender that left everything trembling. Fingers dug into skin, lips clung hard, bodies locked as if trying to fuse. Shivers chased down spines long after the climax hit, leaving both gasping against each other's mouths, holding one another as though letting go would mean losing everything. After the fire ebbed, there was no pulling away, only a soft pressing of foreheads together, breaths mingling, hearts thudding out confessions that mouths were too exhausted to speak. The world outside could no longer exist. What had passed between them had rewritten everything. Guilt tried to worm its way in, but desire was stronger, love louder. What had seemed forbidden now felt inevitable, an awakening long overdue. Even as the body calmed and limbs finally rested, warmth spread deep in the chest, warmth that refused to fade with time or daylight. Something had shifted unalterably. There could be no returning to the way things were. Eyes that once pretended not to linger now held openly. Touches that once trembled in fear now reached without hesitation. It became clear that restraint had been an illusion from the very beginning. Whatever this was, it had been waiting, pulsing beneath the heart's surface for far too long, growing stronger in the shadows until finally it broke free. What began in secrecy refused to stay hidden, because once a forbidden connection awakens every buried need inside, there's no going back to sleep. It started long before the night truly began, an ache born from moments too fleeting to hold on to, yet too powerful to ignore. Every brush of shoulders in passing left an echo. Every accidental touch of fingertips was followed by a sting of longing that lingered deep beneath the skin. Nothing about those touches was meant to happen, and yet they did, with a sweetness edged in danger. It wasn't the touches themselves that burned, but what they carried, a craving drunk on secrecy, trembling with the knowledge that crossing the line would rewrite everything that came before. It grew slowly, one stolen moment after another, a laugh shared too closely, a pause held too long, a compliment dropped like a seed to see if it would grow. It did, quietly at first, like a secret blooming in a dark place. But once it began, nothing could stop it. Eyes started searching for each other in every room, eager and unwilling to admit how desperate they were to meet. Hands found excuses just to be near, passing a glass, fixing a strand of hair, brushing away something that wasn't even there. And every time it happened, something tightened inside, pulling each a step closer to the fire. Desire can be polite. It can wait. This one didn't. This one breathed down every inch of space between two bodies until there was none left. Words became heavier. Conversations trembled with meanings left unsaid. Hearts started thudding for reasons no one dared explain. It felt like madness, beautiful, terrifying madness, knowing how wrong it could become and craving it anyway. Fighting it made it worse. Every time resistance rose up, it found itself melting back down beneath the warmth of a gaze that never should have lingered so long. The first real touch wasn't planned. It never is. It happened simply because it had to. An evening slipping into night, voices softer, the whole world dimming around the edges. One step too close, one breath too many, and suddenly hesitation shattered. Fingers grazed skin with intent that could no longer be hidden. Those hands didn't pull back. They remained, emboldened, trembling slightly with the truth of what they wanted. That one moment collapsed every wall. Nothing would be the same after. Lips followed next, with the hunger of everything that had ever been denied. It wasn't a kiss meant to taste or tease, it was a confession. Every second spent apart poured into it like rainfall after drought. That kiss felt like hunger meeting its answer at last. Soft at first, but quickly growing devastating. Teeth dragged, breath tangled, hands roamed with a reverence that made the body ache. Clothes whispered against skin as bodies pressed so closely that one heartbeat was impossible to separate from the other. Everything forbidden suddenly felt inevitable. The night spun into wildness, blind need mingled with unbearable sweetness. Every kiss demanded to go deeper. Every touch begged not to end. The world outside disappeared, leaving nothing but two souls finally allowed to set each other aflame. Skin brushed skin. Mouths found places that made gasps become prayers. With every movement, hips and lips and hands explored like explorers claiming stolen territory. Every soft moan only pulled them deeper into the madness. Passion poured like fire over oil, unstoppable and fierce. But beneath it, something even more dangerous stirred tenderness, the kind of tenderness that breaks hearts open because it feels too real. There was no control, no thought of consequences, only the rhythm of bodies learning each other urgently, perfectly. His hands framing a face as though holding something precious, fingers brushing down a spine with such care it brought tears burning behind closed eyes. The softest moments in between the wild ones carved deeper than any fevered kiss. They whispered each other's names like secrets too sacred to shout. Every promise their mouths didn't speak was carried by their touch promises of never forgetting, of remembering this night until the end of everything. Hours blurred, they clung to each other as hunger crescendoed into something even more powerful, surrender. A surrender so complete it felt holy, and then came that final breaking point when desire and emotion became indistinguishable. When hearts thundered and breath stopped, and every fiber of being screamed to hold on tighter. In that moment, it became undeniable. This wasn't just lust. This was something rooted deep in the soul, awakened and unstoppable. The kind of connection that changes everything it touches. Nothing could be the same after the night finished reshaping their lives. Wet lips parted with reluctance. A hand still rested on a beating heart, as though afraid to let go and wake up from a dream. But it wasn't a dream, it was real, utterly, terrifyingly real. Shame never arrived like expected. Instead, there was only warmth, exhaustion, and a strange peace that said something meant to happen finally had. They lay breathless, tangled in each other's arms, knowing not a single rule remained unbroken, and not a single regret existed for it. Because hearts that fall in forbidden desire don't simply burn. They belong. It happened faster than reason could catch, slower than desire wanted. One moment there was distance, the next there was none. Fingers pressed into skin with a kind of desperate tenderness, as if needing to memorize every inch before daylight dared to interrupt. There was no sweet easing into it, only a headlong fall, hearts pounding so hard it felt like two bodies were trying to speak through their chests. Breath tangled with breath as hands roamed like they had been waiting forever to be allowed this freedom. It wasn't frantic, but it wasn't gentle either. It lived in that sacred place between, where hunger and devotion are the same emotion, just spoken in different tongues. When mouths met, it was not just a kiss, it was a claiming. Soft lips bruised from the depth of it, teeth brushed in the kind of contact that shocks the soul awake. Every taste filled an emptiness that had gone unnamed for so long. Bodies pressed tighter, molding into shapes that didn't remember ever being apart. Muscles tensed and relaxed under each touch, electric pulses racing under the skin. His hand at the base of the spine, pulling closer, her fingers tangled in his hair, anchoring him as if letting go would mean losing breath forever. The world disappeared in slow pulses of heat and need. Clothes slipped away without ceremony, but each inch revealed felt like a secret whispered. There was reverence in the way eyes lingered, as if seeing was as intimate as touching. Skin flushed under that gaze, shivering without cold, anticipating something too powerful to stop. Every sound, a gasp, a sigh, a broken moan, echoed with emotion far beyond the moment. When he finally entered, it wasn't just body entering body. It was everything long guarded opening all at once. The connection was fierce, raw, almost unbearable in its intensity. Each thrust wasn't just movement, it was conversation. "And I've missed you, and I see you, and I need you. The rhythm was slow at first, deep and consuming, forcing both to feel every stretch, every pulse of warmth, until it became impossible not to move faster, hungrily, helplessly. Sweat slicked between pressed chests, sliding down spines. Fingernails scored across backs, leaving marks meant to fade but destined to remain somewhere deeper. There was no fear, no hesitation, only surrender. Everything spoken came in fragments, whispered names, gasping pleas, but it said enough. Love and lust stopped pretending to be different things, and instead twined around each other with the same heartbeat. Bodies rocked in perfect chaos, the bed creaking softly under the weight of the moment. One shifted above the other, hair falling like a curtain around flushed faces, lips meeting again and again between breaths that tasted like forever. Eyes stayed locked and sometimes rolled back as stars burst behind closed lids. Pleasure built thick and heavy in the belly, shimmering out into limbs until nothing could be done but cling tighter. It came like a wave, first small tremors, then a crash so overwhelming it brought tears to lashes. Release was explosive, beautiful, shattering, voices breaking as names spilled from lips coated in love and raw need. Still, the bodies didn't let go. Even as the storm settled, limbs twined together without questioning why. His fingers traced gentle circles at the curve of the hip, faces tucked into damp necks, mouths placing soft kisses over racing pulses. The room was filled with the hum of spent desire, but underneath it beat something quieter, something impossibly vast. Love throbbed through fingertips as much as hunger ever had. They stayed that way, skin cooling but hearts warming, unwilling to break the spell by moving even an inch. There was safety here, in the tangle, in the knowledge that this impossible collision, had changed everything. When he whispered again, it was softer this time, words not meant to arouse but to soothe. She answered with fingertips against his jaw, tracing the line of someone she knew she would never know. Bodies that had just raged with desire now pressed together with unbelievable softness. Legs tangled chest to back, arms fully wrapped. Every breath felt sacred, shared. Neither asked where things would go from here. Both knew the truth without needing to say it. Other lovers might fade with the fire, but not this. Because what burned between them left more than heat. It left devotion, and so they stayed like that through the night, sometimes stirring to kiss slowly, lazily, sometimes just to feel skin meet skin again and again. There was no panic at Dawn's slow arrival. Somehow both understood this had never been just about a night of physical closeness. This was the rebirth of something too powerful to be confined to shadows. Light crept into the room, tracing golden lines over tangled bodies, but nothing inside faded. The fire hadn't died. It had transformed into something deeper, something sure. What happened between them could never belong to lust alone, because even as hunger roared, love whispered louder. There are certain kinds of nights that don't simply pass, they imprint, quietly carving themselves into places beneath the skin where nothing else has ever been able to reach. That kind of night doesn't announce itself with fireworks nor chaos. It arrives softly and changes everything unexpectedly, leaving a mark so deep it becomes impossible to ever return to who existed before it happened. It began with closeness that didn't feel sudden at all, but strangely inevitable, like two currents drifting toward each other for years before finally touching. There was something powerful in the silence between breaths, a kind of charged stillness that made even the smallest movements feel heavy with meaning. There wasn't the frantic rush that usually comes with desire. It was slower, more reverent, as if each moment needed to be savored, each kiss held long enough to sink beneath the surface, each caress an unspoken confession. Skin met skin, not as strangers crashing into each other, but as something familiar finally coming home. The warmth of being held, the gentle intensity of lips brushing, the longing that made fingertips tremble, everything moved deeper than the body itself. and awakened parts that had never truly been alive until then. There was a moment when the world narrowed down to that single connection, breath tangled, heartbeats stumbling, the soft sound of a sigh falling into the space between. In that closeness, pleasure wasn't blinding, it was illuminating. Every delicate shiver, every arch, every surrender carried an emotional truth so raw it felt dangerous. Nothing about it was careless. It was deliberate, consuming, and undeniably tender. There was devotion in the way hands cradled curves gently, pleasure in the way lips traced slow patterns across sensitive skin, awakening sensation layer by layer. It wasn't about chasing release, it was about sinking so deeply into each other that everything else outside disappeared. Time blurred. It could have been minutes or it could have been hours, but everything inside that moment stretched endlessly. Eyes met, not wide with shock, but soft with knowing. Every kiss felt like a vow disguised as desire, promising silently that this connection was rare, was real, and had found them for a reason beyond logic. It didn't feel like new love. It felt ancient, as if two souls recognized each other from somewhere far away and had been trying to return ever since. When pleasure finally peaked, it wasn't a collision, it was a surrender, shared and sacred. Bodies trembled together, not only from sensation, but from the emotional intimacy that surrounded it. It felt like breaking apart and becoming whole at the same time. Even as breathing slowly steadied in the aftermath, a quiet truth settled into the air. This was unforgettable. There was no undoing what had just happened. Long after bodies laid still, stretched across rumpled sheets, warmth continued to glow underneath the skin. Fingers stayed intertwined as if afraid to separate. There was a softness in the way hands brushed hair from a forehead, fingers tracing lazy circles along a shoulder. Each tiny gesture said what words could never fully express: you matter. This mattered. Eventually morning threatened at the edge of the curtains, but even knowing the night was ending couldn't dim the connection that had formed. The way he looked in that moment, half in shadow, half in the glow of fading lamplight, carved itself permanently into memory. He didn't just look satisfied, he looked changed, which made it impossible not to also feel changed. Because love like this doesn't merely touch the body, it hooks into the soul, anchoring itself there forever. Long after footsteps echo quietly down hallways, long after daylight hides what happened in darkness, something inside continues to burn. The memory doesn't fade. It grows warmer, sharper, like embers stirred beneath ashes. Often, without warning, the mind drifts back to that single night, to that perfect closeness, to how it felt to be seen completely and still desired deeply. And every time it returns, it awakens the heart all over again, a secret flame igniting behind the ribs, reminding that once, even if only for a single night, love was tasted in its purest, fiercest, most unforgettable form. Because some nights don't end, they echo forever. If this story stirred something real inside your heart, don't let it end here. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because here, every story is a heartbeat waiting to be felt again.